Hey guys, my name is Jamie and I'll be taking you through a short user interface design lecture that will hopefully be useful to you in this course, especially when it comes to the assignments. This lecture has 3 sections. The first is a UI analysis part where we'll look at some good and bad designs from a user's perspective and hopefully sharpen our design awareness and understand the impact that a good UI has. In the second part, we will look at our own UI and assess the design, finding ways to put our users first and improve upon it. And the last is an optional section for those who want to level up their designs. But if you're cramming, I would not recommend it. So in this first part, the UI analysis, we'll be looking at 4 to 5 different websites and analyzing their UI. For each, we'll have a different goal to help assess how effective they are in allowing their users to achieve their goals. So let's get started. Okay, so for this first section, just enjoy it. We're going to practice putting ourselves in the user's shoes and observe a few UIs. So note down any design strategies, things you've never thought about before, and things that you might want to remember for the future. Our first one is LinkedIn. So there are 2 types of users that would probably visit this page. The first is a returning user who would want to sign in, or a new user who wants to understand what LinkedIn is and make an account. So I found this website to be very minimalistic. So for returning users, most important information is right up here. They can easily just sign in. Your attention is instantly drawn to this big heading, and it's clear, easy to use, easy to navigate. I also notice there's a lot of balance when it comes to the color scheme, very muted, a lot of balance when it comes to shapes. A lot of things are very round, this round frames. A lot of helpful graphics. In this one in particular, I really liked this one here because LinkedIn is all about staying connected, and this graphic just communicates that perfectly. And the order is very, very logical. So most likely, first-time users who visit this page, they're reading information about LinkedIn, trying to understand it, suss it out, and then they get down to this part here, and then the Get Started button is right there. So it's strategically placed at the bottom after it introduces what LinkedIn is. And I just think that's very logical. And then here you go, you have like this, the footer with a directory of all the pages someone might want to look for. So I definitely think that this is a good UI, very clean, very professional, which is what LinkedIn is all about. Next up, let's take a look at Canva. Our goal today is to make a marketing poster. All right, so as soon as Canva opens up, you can see that this banner here instantly draws the eye. So Canva uses color and scale effectively to make their website very easy to navigate. And this is a really good example of a website that knows what their user might need and presents that to them. So I want to make a marketing poster, so I can see that from the suggestions here, marketing is one of them. Click on that. Poster, easy. All right, and then it opens up the Canva editor. All right, what I like as well is that for first-time users, they provide plenty of help. Okay, so this is an example. They have an onboarding video, and they also have a tutorial. So new users can either watch the tutorial or they can skip it. So let's skip it for now. And then I want to design a poster, and there you go. They have templates, which make it super easy, super quick, super efficient. And yeah, easy. Look, I'm already done. I can instantly download it, and there you go. I've completed my goal in a few short steps. So what you can get from this is to 1, provide a lot of help for new users, and 2, understand your users' goals and design for that. Great. Let's look at Quora next. So our goal is to find an answer to a question. As soon as I load up Quora.com, I am met with this login screen. So unfortunately, unlike Canva, Quora requires their users to sign in order to view their content and their interface. If I were a user who did not yet have an account with Quora and I needed to find an answer urgently and immediately, this is already not ideal. Not a great experience because now I have a barrier to entry. However, I was able to bypass this by Googling Quora question, and then I was able to get in. I'll start off first of all with what I like. What I like about this interface is that the navigation bar is very minimalistic, the color scheme is simple, and this itself is easy to use. I also like that the related questions is constant, no matter how much I scroll down. That's very useful, very helpful, good utility. And I also like how big and bold this writing is. Now, what I don't like is that Quora is littered with ads. The first thing that you see immediately underneath the question is already another ad, and it's a question that is completely unrelated. I don't like that. Even throughout the answers, there are advertisements littered throughout, and it becomes confusing as to which ones are answers, which ones are questions. And then I'm not sure if this is an answer to the initial question or if this is an answer to this new question that they're asking here. It's just very confusing to navigate, very difficult to read. And if I just needed an answer that was easy, quick, I would not go to Quora. Okay, so that's a bad user experience. Let's look at Yale School of Art. So I've given us the goal of finding out how to enroll into the school. On first impressions, my eye is drawn to here. Also to here because the background is very distracting and a lot of the text doesn't have a solid background. As you can see, the text is just highlighted. There's a lack of consistency, lack of order in the layout, a lot of different sizes. I think scale is used very poorly here, a lot of different size text. Here, quick links, I think, okay, maybe I should go here. Maybe opportunities is where I need to go, but then I realize that I'm taken to the wrong thing. And this background itself is distracting. And then finally, I realize this little sidebar here, it's very tiny, even though it's very important, which I did not initially notice. So let's click on apply to the school. And then now we're greeted with a white background for once. So as you can see, like there's a poor sense of scale. Look at these different sizes, very inconsistent. And yeah, it's just really difficult to navigate, really difficult to complete my goal because my mind is spending time trying to process what is in front of me. Let's compare this with UNSW's website. No bias at all. So with the same goal of trying to enroll into the school, it's easy to find what I need. So I already can see that I have a few options up here. Study might be the one I want. I can already see that this is where I will find all of my information that I might need, what to study, experience getting in, and then I instantly can see apply now, which is my initial goal, and I can quickly tap on that and there you go, all I need. So as you can see, clean, minimalistic interfaces are definitely the way to go because not only are they nicer to look at, they are easier to navigate and your users will have a better time trying to complete their tasks. Part 2. So now that we've roasted some other people's user interfaces, let's assess our own. So you've probably learnt some good practices when it comes to user interface design, planning out your UI, prototyping, iterating, testing, etc. Great. However, most likely you've made progress in the assignment and you've realized you won't finish all of the milestones in time, and so now you're looking for ways to scrape a few more marks in the UI section. Been there, done that. So I've compiled a list of user-focused questions and some quick practical tips that will hopefully help you improve your design. I think that this section is most useful for when you're just about to begin your assignment or once you've already started, and I suggest that you use it like a cheat sheet. Maybe watch it while you step through your assignment. It's super brief. I tried to make it as consumable and straightforward as possible for those of you who can't help but cram. Me. First up, we have visibility. So ways to assess this are to ask yourself, how visible are the functions, options, and controls? Does a first-time user need to guess or click on random things to figure out where the controls are? So don't let your user need to scroll to find important controls. You should keep your most important functions at the very top of a page, visible and easily accessible, like Google Drive. The flow is usually from left to right, top to bottom. It's not always the case, but just something to keep in mind when designing. It's good to prioritize buttons over hamburger menus. This is because buttons usually have better visibility because they have their labels, but if the screen real estate does not allow, hamburger menus are fine. Make sure that you check different screen dimensions and make sure that controls do not disappear or do weird things like the UNSW website. And make sure that users know what page they're on. So Good visibility might mean big bold headings or even breadcrumbs for easier navigation. And lastly, a note about recognition rather than recall. It basically means show the users their choices rather than making them recall or search for something. A good example of this is Canva. So Canva shows users suggestions of what they might want to design, and it just makes the process so much easier. However, a counterexample is the UNSW researcher website, where users have to search for a researcher name or topic. Next, we have affordance. So affordance basically revolves around how many hints or clues are given to my user that suggest how my user interface is meant to be used. Ways to assess this are to ask yourself, is it clear what each button does? What hints are given that suggest how a control is supposed to be used? If icons are used, are they intuitive or universal? So links are often underlined. They should be a different color from text so that users know that they're clickable. The convention is blue, so links are blue. Buttons should be outlined or at least change color or change style when hovered over, just to suggest that it's clickable. And icons often match real-world applications or the natural order of things in the real world. More on that later. Next is feedback. So good feedback helps users in completing their tasks. Ask yourself, once my user has completed an action, how do they know that the system has acknowledged it? So when a user does something, for example, deleting a post or sending an email, give them some feedback, a pop-up or a success or failure message. For buttons or links, make it change color once they've pressed it. An example is Instagram's like button. And if the system is doing something in the background for a long time, generally greater than 1.5 seconds, show the user a loading message or a spinning pinwheel. It doesn't need to be exactly in this form, as long as you can show users that something is happening in the background. So next we have consistency. So consistency is important so that your website feels like a cohesive product. You can ask yourself, do different screens look the same? Same goes for buttons, controls, and cards. Ask, is your color scheme consistent throughout the application? YouTube's Explore page is an example of bad consistency. So as you can see on the learning page, they have a banner that looks like this. And then on their news page, it's a static banner. And then on their fashion page, for some reason, it is in dark mode. So it's good to have a consistent color scheme and consistent layout throughout your application. Often it's best to stick to one font and then have different weights or styles for them, or you could go with two if necessary. You don't have to stick to that, it's just a recommendation. The UNSW Contacts website is a bad example of this. They have a lot of different fonts going on, and so I do not recommend that. For buttons, often it's recommended to stick to two different variations, so primary and secondary, as shown in Instagram here. And lastly, don't implement jarring changes. Implementing constraints helps prevent your users from making mistakes. Questions that you can ask are, am I limiting the errors my users can make by restricting controls? Do users have access to controls that they shouldn't have permissions for? Quick tips. So if the user hasn't entered any input yet, disable the buttons to continue registration. If the user is not logged in, don't show functions only registered users should have access to. And lastly, minimize room for errors. Effectiveness and utility mainly revolve around whether your users have access to the tools they need to achieve their goals. So ask yourself, can my users complete their tasks? Can they achieve their goals? Make sure that users can access all the controls they need. So Adobe Photoshop's toolbar is an example of good utility, and same with Canva. They provide all of the controls the user might need to do their edits or create their documents. So a good way to make sure that your application has good effectiveness is to understand their goal for each checkpoint and make sure that that can be achieved. A good example, I think, of good effectiveness and utility is the When to Meet platform. They have the calendar, they have the times, they give the user all the tools that they need in order to complete their task of creating a poll or an event. It's all there. And lastly, navigation bars should be present and visible on all pages. There are some exceptions, for example, if a user is completing a quiz or a test and they shouldn't be able to escape that, but those cases are very rare. Next, we have efficiency. Efficiency differs to effectiveness because it revolves around how quick a user can complete their task. Questions that you can ask are, can my user carry out tasks in minimal steps? Is my user able to maintain high levels of productivity? So my quick tips are limit the amount of steps as much as you can. You don't want to make your app tedious to use. Remove completely any unnecessary steps. And if multiple steps are required and there's nothing that you can do about that, then at least show the user their progress via a progress bar or some text that shows the user what step they're on. A tiny way in which you can implement efficiency is through a button that takes the user back to the top, especially for applications where they need to scroll a lot. So for example, Reddit does this really well. Basically, for efficiency, the rule is just simplify things as much as you can. So next is safety. So similar to constraints, safety is very important for error prevention. Ask yourself, are my users protected from making errors? Do I help them recover once an error has been made? And do I help my user feel like they're in control or that it's safe to explore my interface? So my quick tips are, if a user does something by accident, make sure that they're able to undo it. In cases where this is not possible, then provide a warning before the system completes that action. For example, in TextEdit, if I close the app without saving my work, it shows me a warning about saving the document. So this is very helpful. Definitely do this, especially for potentially dangerous actions. So deleting something, publishing something, etc. Another important tip is do not place buttons too close together, especially when they have opposite functions. So here you can see the delete button is super far from the save button, because if they're too close together, it's very easy for the user to accidentally click one when they meant to click the other. And lastly, when the user does make an error, two things. The first is to explain the error in plain language, and step two, suggest a solution. So in Adobe Photoshop's error at the top here, the error is not explained well. It uses a lot of technical jargon. Try to avoid that, and it doesn't suggest a solution. The error on the bottom, however, explains it in plain language and suggests a solution, and that's a much better user experience. Next, learnability. So learnability is important because you want your users to understand how to use your application, especially first-time users. So questions that you can ask are, is my application intuitive? And do I provide instructions, tutorials, or tips, especially for first-time users? So I suggest use placeholders in inputs to demonstrate what the user should type. As you can see in Canva, it shows an example of a name, email, and password. This makes the interface much easier to learn and pick up. And for complicated functions, I suggest providing help pages or giving the users a tutorial. Moving on, common standards and conventions. So this comes hand in hand with learnability, because the more application abides by conventions, it's much easier for people to pick up because it's more familiar. So ask, is my interface somewhat familiar to the user? Are you following conventions? Some conventions are, the user profile controls are usually in the top right corners, as you can see in Amazon. Clicking on the logo usually leads to the home page, and symbols should match their real-world applications. So these are some common ones. A magnifying glass is used in conjunction with a search bar. A shopping cart or basket often means purchases. There's a heart or like symbol, and a floppy disk means save. Okay, there are many more, but ain't nobody got time for that, so if you're curious, definitely give it a search. Next is catering to all. So this one has to do with, are you catering to your new users as well as your returning users? Questions you can ask, do I give new users enough support or instructions? Am I slowing down my expert users? So experts no longer need tips, tutorials, warnings, etc. So find a way to turn these off. Often it's a do not show again checkbox. Decide which functions are not absolutely necessary and can be moved into an advanced options. This prevents your application from overwhelming your new users with too many controls and too many functions. So often it's a balance between learnability and efficiency, your new users learning how to use your application, and your expert users or your returning users being able to maintain a high level of productivity. And I just wanted to add a quick note about accessibility considerations. So consider alternative text, easy read options, captions, and hierarchy to facilitate the use of screen readers. And lucky last, aesthetics and minimalism. So we saw earlier how minimalistic applications usually are easier to navigate. To assess this on your own user interface, ask yourself, do I show only essential information or controls on a page? Do I have unnecessary clutter? So it's good to get into the habit of asking yourself, is this information relevant now? If it's not, perhaps you can move it into a page where it's more useful. So for example, change username can be moved into settings. Users don't need to see change username on a home page. Often it's a balance between minimalism and good visibility. So for each case, assess which one you believe is more important. Lastly, things to consider are symmetry, balance, contrast, scale, and unity. These are visual design principles that you can research even further, and they just help to improve the aesthetics and cohesiveness of your application. Part 3. So this section of the lecture is optional. Feel free to turn it off if you're cramming. Basically, these are just some nice additions that will level up your UI. It will enhance the design. It's not super important, and it's super brief as well. It's just a little introduction, so definitely research these things further if you're interested. First one is dark mode. So dark mode is a nice addition to enhance your user's experience. It's definitely trending right now, so it's good to learn if you are looking at getting into front-end development. It's good to learn how to implement that now. I think it's very self-explanatory, so I won't get into too much detail, but definitely something to think about. Next up, we have micro interactions. I love micro interactions. I wrote a paper on it. So basically, earlier we discussed bigger ways to improve our UI. Micro interactions, on the other hand, are teeny tiny little details that enhance the user's experience. They may come in the form of little tiny animations, and I've just added some examples here, but I definitely suggest researching this if you're interested in designing little details. So designing for emotions is quite self-explanatory as well. What I suggest is to search up desirable user experience goals. And while you're designing, keep those goals in mind, and it'll definitely enhance your UI. One way of designing for emotions is in diffusing tension. So here are two examples. You have the Google dinosaur game and a Woolworths example where there's a problem in aisle 6. So you can use humor and gamification to diffuse tension, especially when users run into errors. So that's an example of designing for emotions. And lastly, we have cognitive load. So this revolves around how much the user's brain has to process as they're navigating and looking at a website. So earlier we looked at Yale School of Art. So this requires high cognitive load because our brain is trying to process what exactly is happening on this page, and that is something that you do not want to do. And that's why minimalism is the way to go, so that your user can save up their cognitive resources for completing their tasks. Okay, so that's all that I have for you. Definitely look into these things more if you're interested or confused, because I did go over it really briefly. Good luck with your assignments. Good luck with the course. Hope you enjoyed. Bye!